All right. Today, we are diving into something called Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP. You know, it's the invisible software that pretty much runs the world's biggest companies. And it's this fascinating beast with two very different sides. On one hand, it holds this incredible promise, but on the other, it presents some very, very real peril. So, let's get into it. So, let me just start with a question for you. Imagine this. You're in charge, and your company is about to screech to a halt. We're talking about losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every single hour. What do you do? Because that's not a hypothetical. That is the exact situation one manager found herself in.
Her name was Elizabeth Benson. She's a purchasing manager at an automotive supplier called Tristan, and she gets this nightmare phone call. One of her key vendors' factories is on fire. This factory makes a special resin that her company absolutely needs to build parts for major car manufacturers. So no resin, no parts. No parts, the assembly line stops. The clock is ticking, and you can practically hear the money just burning away.
But Benson just springs into action. In a ridiculously short amount of time, she's using her computer system to see everything everywhere all at once. She can check real-time inventory levels across every single warehouse. She analyzes the manufacturing schedules to see which orders are the most critical. She starts reallocating inventory and rerouting shipments that are already on their way. She even figures out which other suppliers are going to be impacted by this mess and starts ordering alternative materials from new ones. I mean, it's a complete 360-degree view of the entire business in the middle of a crisis. And the result? In just 3 hours, a potential multi-million-dollar catastrophe was completely avoided. Now here's the kicker. Just 1 year before this happened, this would have been absolutely impossible. It would have taken her team days, maybe even weeks, to hunt down all that information. By then, it's way too late. So what was the difference maker? It was a brand new, highly integrated information system, an ERP. So that story, that's the promise of an ERP. But what exactly is it? Honestly, the best way to think about it is as the central nervous system of a company. It's the thing that connects every single part and lets them talk to each other.
Okay, so here's the textbook definition. An ERP links all the big critical parts of a business, we're talking finance, manufacturing, HR, distribution, all of it, into one tightly integrated system. But the magic words there are shared data. See, instead of every department having its own little spreadsheet or database, its own information silo, everyone is looking at the exact same information in real time. And its reach is just massive. The ERP's footprint touches basically every core function you can think of, from the back office stuff like finance and HR to the front office operations like sales and customer service. The whole goal is for it to be the single source of truth for the entire organization.
So you're probably thinking, if these systems are so powerful, why doesn't every company just get one and call it a day? Well, this is where we get to the other side of the coin, the peril. Implementing an ERP is an incredibly high-stakes gamble, where the solution you're paying for can become an even bigger problem. And it starts with that price tag.
First off, let's just talk about the money. For a big company, say one with about $5 billion in revenue, the total cost to get one of these systems up and running can be $100 million. Yeah. You heard that right. That's 2 to 3% of a company's total yearly revenue on a single IT project.
And this is the part that should really keep executives up at night. Even with that kind of insane investment, more than half of all ERP projects fail. And failure can mean a lot of things, right? It could be that it goes way over budget, or it doesn't deliver the promised benefits, or in the worst cases, it actually harms the business. The odds are, quite literally, a coin flip.
And don't think this is just a problem for smaller companies. We're talking about giants of industry. Hershey, for example, famously botched an ERP rollout right before Halloween and couldn't get their candy to stores. Nike and Whirlpool also had very public, very expensive struggles. So this is a risk that even the biggest and smartest companies in the world are not immune to.
The stakes are just so high because this market is enormous. If we look at data from around the year 2000, you can see it was a battlefield dominated by a few huge players. You had SAP leading the pack with about 30% of the market, and then Oracle and PeopleSoft as other major forces. This isn't some niche software. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry built on these incredibly complex systems.
So why is it so hard? Why do so many of these massive projects go off the rails?
Well, the risk often comes down to navigating what is basically an implementation minefield. We're going to look at 3 of the biggest, toughest decisions that can make or break an ERP project.
Okay, decision number 1. This is the big one. Do you change your business to fit the software, or do you change the software to fit your business? If you standardize, you just adopt the processes that are already built into the ERP. It's way faster, it's simpler. But what if your weird, unique way of doing things is actually what makes you better than your competitors? Well, you can customize the software to keep that edge, but that is wildly expensive, it's super complex, and it turns every future software update into an absolute nightmare.
All right, big choice number 2. Do you go all in with one single vendor, like SAP or Oracle, for absolutely everything? That's the simpler path for sure, but you might get stuck with modules that aren't really the best. The other option is what's called a best-in-breed approach. You pick the best HR software from one company, the best finance tool from another, and so on. That gives you a ton of flexibility, but now you have this massive headache of trying to stitch them all together so they can actually talk to each other. Fun fact, about 60% of companies actually choose this more complicated route.
And this quote from the former CIO of Dell just perfectly nails the risk of that single vendor approach. Dell actually tried to implement SAP. They spent 2 years on it and then they just abandoned the project. Why? Because their business was changing faster than the monolithic software could keep up. They realized they needed way more flexibility than one giant system could ever give them.
And the third challenge, this one is all about people. To get an ERP implemented, you have to pull your absolute best employees, the ones who really know how the business works, off of their day jobs, sometimes for years. So while they're off building the future of the company, who's running the business today? And then what happens when it's all over? These people now have incredibly valuable skills, and they often get poached by consulting firms, or they just leave for a new challenge. It can create this huge brain drain right when you need them most.
So with all these challenges, you might be thinking this whole ERP thing is in trouble. But it's not going away, no way. Instead, the industry is doing what it has to do. It's evolving to survive. So let's take a look at how it's adapting.
I mean, these systems have been evolving for decades, right alongside the big shifts in technology. They started way back in the mainframe era, then they shifted to the client-server models that dominated the 90s, and now, facing slowing growth in their traditional markets, they're being forced to adapt all over again.
And they're basically doing it in 3 main ways. First, they're expanding, adding more features like customer relationship management, or CRM, to get more business from their existing customers. Second, they're trying to move down market, creating simpler, maybe cheaper versions for smaller companies that could never afford the big stuff. And finally, and this is a big one, they're web-enabling everything, using the internet to make their systems more flexible, easier to access, and hopefully cheaper to run. Which really brings us to this final thought. The entire history of ERP and its future is really a battle between 2 big ideas. Are you trying to build a perfectly efficient, standardized machine? Or are you trying to create a flexible, adaptable organism that can react and change with the world around it? The answer to that question, it doesn't just define a company's software strategy. It might just define its entire philosophy for success.